It's been a good while since I last covered an out-and-out, dyed-in-the-wool, shot-on VHS film. In fact, fun fact, while to you, the viewer, it's likely to have been less than 6 months since my last SOV review, not including the mini-DV Suburban Sasquatch, with 1991's Frankie and Pals, that review was actually written in early 2023, and got held over because of a load of my family just randomly deciding to die. And before that, we tackled Barbecue and Hack-O-Lantern, which, while that review got released in September 2024, was actually watched and written in February 2024, so while it hasn't been that long for you, for me, we're looking at basically just over a year since I've actually sat down and taken a dip into that fuzzy warm glow that only VHS can provide. And so, I decided to check out an SOV film made right here in Blighty. A film that's been recommended to me by a number of folk, but was first raised to my attention by longtime friend of the show, Channel 83. Now going as Dead Formats, who has a very good podcast that's ongoing, link in the description. And I thank him very greatly, because while my opinions on 1998 or 1999's Garden Tool Massacre are fairly succinct, I wouldn't have heard of this film without him saying it was probably one of the best SOV films that he'd ever seen. The film itself was a somewhat fractured production, with 20 minutes of the film being shot in 1997 and 45 minutes being captured the following year in the summer of 1998. They then added about 5 minutes of footage from the director's previous short films to help make the runtime up for feature distribution. Before, well, things get a bit vague. But it either got a super limited release in bootleg circles, or it stayed largely within the group of folks who helped to make it, but it's got a wider release now. So, I figured with a name like Garden Tool Massacre, it's got to be up to something, and, well, it kind of is, I guess. So this was the directorial and writing debut of UK filmmaker David Hines, and we open in August 1990 with a shady-looking figure standing out in the street at night. A short time later, he breaks into the house of what we shortly find out to be his wife, and without saying a word, promptly stabs her 50 million times and leaves the scene. We then get a caption card naming our mysterious man as one Charles Scavallini, and the captioning informs us that shortly after the attack he was captured by the police, he stood trial for the murder where he was found too mentally unstable to stand and was sentenced to a life sentence in a maximum security mental health facility where he would be under the treatment of Dr. Goldstein. We're then told that this film will chart the last 2 days of Charles Scavallini. The film then jumps forward to the present day, 1997, and August 21st, 2 days before the anniversary of Charles being captured by the police, where we see the sanitarium where Charles is being kept. A janitor is cleaning the halls who's disrupted by the sound of smashing glass. Naturally, this film being called Garden Tool Massacre, he goes to investigate the noise, and it doesn't take long for him to find the sharp end of a large pair of scissors, with Charles on the stabbing end of them. After which, Charles basically just walks out of the facility with no real explanation for how he got out of his cell, how he managed to find the scissors, nor how he managed to just walk out of the facility. With that, it's morning, and we're in the sunny north of England. The film doesn't exactly say where, but I'd put my right nut on it being somewhere around Manchester by the way of the West Midlands. And we're introduced to Man. No, to clarify, an issue with this film that I should have mentioned up front is that the sound quality on it is just horrendous, with all the audio being captured by the camera's built-in microphones, not at all helped by the fact that, even being someone who lives where these accents are prominent, they're extra thick, the cast don't enunciate, and that makes it really difficult to understand exactly what's going on. So, Man wakes up and goes to make breakfast, but someone appears to be watching him through the window. After a bit of stalker play and a nice bit of subtle background feeding where our man puts the news on and in the background a report can clearly be heard announcing Scavallini's escape and a public danger warning, it's finally revealed that the guy watching him through the window is in fact friend of Man, who asks him if he's ready for the party tonight before the pair head out to get some supplies. While they're out, we then cut to a guy driving in the woods, who appears to break down. After an extended sequence of him trying to repair his car, he's promptly jumped by Charles, who bumps him off pretty sharpish before, presumably, though it isn't shown on screen, repairing the guy's car and then driving off. Meanwhile, our men return from their manly errands and another 2 men turn up. One of them is apparently called Ash because, Of course he is, and a short time after that the aforementioned party gets into full swing, with drinking and lads doing lads style bantering. As the evening draws in, the gang gather round and one of the blokes tells the others the horrifying tale of Charles Scavellini, which then prompts a full recap of the opening of the film, and what follows after that is basically just a series of fake-outs as our lads repeatedly do the "I'll be right back" trope before heading outside, only in an attempted subversion of that trope, none of them actually get murdered, and every single one of those moments is revealed to basically just be a fake-out to nothing. At which point another caption comes up revealing it's now day 2, and the lads are sleeping off the booze, but one of the blokes is having a right bad dream, mate, prompting footage from later in the film and presumably some of the short film footage to play. Eventually he wakes up, goes and gets a shave, cuts himself and has a funk-out hallucinatory waking dream while enjoying a brew, as most people in England tend to do. The film then basically bins off the lads and instead focuses on a lady. It's now night time again and the lady has just gone home to her flat, but on entering the hallway light immediately blows, leaving her in the dark. Frustrated, she goes to put her shopping away and she turns on some more lights. She then receives a phone call, and it's revealed that an unclear time shift has happened and that we're now in a different location on the night that the lads were partying on day 1 because this woman is the girlfriend of one of the lads at that party. And she's not too impressed that he's actually gone to the party in the first place. So, she heads out to the car and drives somewhere. And then we cut into, I assume, one of the rooms at the house where the party is taking place, but again the film isn't entirely clear on that. I don't know at this point if this is supposed to be the party from day 1 but from a different perspective, or if there's a separate party happening on day 2 and that whole sequence with the shaving was just there to pad the runtime. But in either case, a party is happening in the past, or the present, or even the sideways past. I don't know, but party! And that kind of takes us into the final act, as our lads and ladettes let their hair down for the hot party of 1997, or 1998, or 1999, and Charles finally actually gets somewhere in the vicinity of the partygoers. Will Charles cause a Garden Tool Massacre? Will the lads get their post-hooch and Tetley's kebab? And is this the best line delivery of "Hurry up, I need to take a piss"?
Hurry up, I need to take a piss.
Ever committed to cinema? Well, all this and more will be answered if you check out Garden Tool Massacre. And frustrating really is the word that springs to mind with this one, because technically I am beyond impressed with this film, but its script absolutely let me down. So, to get this out of the way up front, this film has a very strong affinity for John Carpenter's Halloween. And while it doesn't one-for-one rip it off, which, believe me, I am beyond grateful for, it does homage it in several ways. The opening setup, an unsuspecting person murders a close relative or loved one and is committed, goes mute and then breaks out 7 years later to the day to commit acts of bloody violence, is pretty in line with the original Halloween. The carjacking scene is also pretty similar too, but the filmmakers have made it clear at points to alter the scenes just enough so that they aren't a clear carbon copy. The teens having various Halloween parties and getting slowly picked off one by one in Halloween are here all congealed into a group of 20-somethings having one party, and slowly they get split up and picked off by our killer. And it puts me in a difficult spot really, where I can appreciate that they didn't just rip off Halloween, but they still didn't change it enough to stop me sitting through this whole thing going, that bit's from Halloween, every 5 to 10 minutes. And let me tell you, nothing pulls you out of a film more than noticing when a filmmaker's half-inched moments from other films tweaked them slightly and inserted them into their film. Beyond that, the frustrations continue. While there is a 3-act structure in place here, it is very lumpy and doesn't have clear transition points. The first act is a pretty solid piece, introducing our killer, the characters, and setting up the mechanisms that will help drive the rest of the movie, but the moment our lads start the party, the film basically goes off the rails. It becomes an incoherent run of sequences of cast members talking to each other, largely inaudibly, with a cavalcade of fake-out kills one after another. The film basically just grinds to a halt plot-wise for the better part of 20 minutes, while a whole lot of nothing really happens. leaving the final act running to around 15 minutes, where it basically shifts from nothing happening to a copy-paste scenario where our partygoers, one at a time, leave the house for one reason or another, get drawn into darker parts of the garden or street, where they're killed awkwardly with one of only a small selection of garden tools. And that wouldn't be so bad if the characters weren't swaggering blokey cocks for most of the runtime, and if the dialogue wasn't so glaringly written by a horror fan in the 90s. The dialogue's hard enough to decipher due to the poor sound quality, but the lines I could decipher were usually referring to beer, birds, pissing, or horror movies, with probably the most egregious moment being a sequence where one of the characters talks at length about the video nasty cannibal Fearox. It comes out of nowhere, it doesn't lead to anything. The only reason it's in the film is to signal to other horror fans in the late 90s that the people who made this film were proper horror fans, because they had access to and could describe in detail moments from the uncut version of the film that at that time was banned in the UK and only available to a limited audience in a censored format. That was the moment that I hard groaned and probably the lowest point in this film. In summary, it's a film that opens fairly strong, if not a little derivatively, before slowing to an absolute crawl right up until the last 15 minutes or so, where it pulls out a repetitive finale that doesn't really leave an impact before dumping you into the credits. It's the kind of script where the moment I took the disc out of the player, I'd already forgotten about 80% of what happened in it. And while I always make notes on the plot and technical details of any of the films I'm reviewing for this channel, I had to rely a lot more on my notes for this review than I have with any other film that I've spoken about in recent memory. Which isn't a good thing. The script was co-written and directed by David Hines. He has 14 directing credits and 12 writing credits in a career spanning from 1997 to the present day. Garden Tool Massacre was his first attempt at a feature production, and since then he's made 9 short films and music videos and 5 feature-length or mid-feature-length horror films. The film was also co-written by Peter Hicken, of which this is his only writing credit. He also plays a character called Pete in this film, but, as mentioned, because of the audio issues, I have no idea which one of the lads that could be. Things do take a turn for the better on the direction front, however. Quite amazingly, with this being the first production made by Hines, this is a concise, clear vision that isn't afraid to experiment and would put some smaller studio productions to shame. For a first-timer right out of the gate, we have a distinctive style and a clear attention to detail that goes above and beyond most people's first shot at making a movie, let alone an SOV one. I'm not entirely sure how many people were involved behind the scenes on this production. If the credits are anything to go by, Hines was basically working solo for the most part, with occasional help from a skeleton crew of folks who just happened to be available. And if that is the case, then he's honestly excelled here. While there are some obvious quality gaps like a lack of cohesion on colour use and lighting tone changing from location to location and sometimes shot to shot because of improper white balancing, what there is at least an attempt at solid stylisation, and I feel it succeeds more than it fails in playing around with that scene structuring. Direction of the cast, however, is a bit of a different story. I won't personally go as far as to say it's lifeless, but it does feel a bit basic. Better than no direction, but it feels like Hines basically explained the scene to the cast, didn't really tell them where the borders of the frame were, and then just let them do the scene without much more instruction. Which here translates to, if they're asked to walk and talk, they literally just walk and talk. No physicality, no projection of the voice, no facial animations. It's just a guy walking and mumbling his lines. The party scenes, however, perfectly encapsulate my memories of 90s parties, which were a load of people sat in chairs in an oppressively hot and humid room, slowly drinking themselves into a coma while a 90s Megamix compilation plays in the background and the room increasingly smells more intensely of cigarette smoke. It captures what 90s parties really did look like, but at the same time, that isn't the most photogenic or animate thing to put down on your film. It would have been nice to have seen people be a bit more lively, a bit more into the party vibe, or even a bit more fearful when our killer finally does turn up. But instead, there's kind of an ambivalence that runs right through this thing. I mean, I should point out that that is how folks from the north would react to this situation, not being asked, because they grew up in the north of England, under Thatcher. You can take your Michael Myers and shove them up your arse compared to her. On the Cine front, much like the direction, I'm actually quite impressed. While it can be said that shots are, for the most part, a little simplistic and there isn't as much B-roll as I'd like to help with variety, shots are largely pretty well composed. They do try to work with depth of field a little bit, they are, for the most part, mindful of not crossing the line, and they actually try to experiment too. Not just with composition of shots, but also with lighting, working with chiaroscuro techniques and utilising coloured lights and lighting gels to really help set the atmosphere. In many ways, I just find it a bit of a shame that they don't really fully incorporate that colour use into the entire film. Instead, it only appears for curated moments, leaving other scenes like times when the lads step outside for one reason or another left to look a little dry and blown out. To that end, the edit is razor for this thing. This is easily one of the best edited SOVs that I've personally seen. Cuts are precise, they do a hell of a lot of match cuts, which are not the easiest cuts to try and make if you're a one-man army editing on VHS or early digital NLEs. The pacing of the sequences are well handled, and there's even some utilisation of early plug-in effects to help give the film distinctive filterings. While, as mentioned, there is a less than ideal amount of B-roll on here, which does lead to some of the scenes running for a fair bit longer than I'd have personally liked without a break, I do have to ultimately applaud this piece not only for being well above average for SOV, but for being so while also being the first feature film made by this guy. In a rare turn of events for this channel, I can't actually really talk about the performances here. In part because, due to the poor audio quality, I don't know who is who, when and how, and in part because the poor video quality and the fact that a lot of the cast dress very similarly has made it hard in the fuzz and dark to pick out exactly who was doing what, where and how. So to keep it fairly universal, I feel like the cast underperform here. I think they could have been better, but I don't think these were professional actors by any stretch, and I think that shows quite clearly. In giving people their first big break in front of the camera, I think they do fine. But for an end product that has, and likely still is, being sold at retail prices, it's not up to snuff in my opinion. To that end, the soundtrack has a bit of an interesting history as well, which makes it difficult to judge. So the film was initially finished with a soundtrack made up almost entirely of copyrighted music, mainly from other movies. The release history for this film is a little vague, but the assumption is that version never left a small circle of friends this film circulated within, with maybe a few copies finding their way into the wild as bootlegs. Obviously, when it came to it getting an actual commercial release, it couldn't have music from Reservoir Dogs and Halloween running right the way through it, so a new score had to be made specifically for its official release, containing only fully licensed and approved tracks. The end result is a score that I think sounds actually pretty bloody good. I know that so many of these smaller studios score their films from royalty-free or royalty-free adjacent libraries, and it usually ends up with around about a dozen or 2 dozen tracks getting run into the ground when they're used to death by these companies. But this, for the most part, sounds fairly original. It fits the bill of this movie and is edited in pretty perfectly. I honestly have no issues with it. I think it's a great fit and it helps to pull all of the visual aspects of the production together into a nice package, which is just enough to help keep me on side with this thing ultimately. As mentioned, the release history for this is a little bit of a murky one, and I suppose a lot of it will depend on what you define as a release. So, this film was finished at some point in 1998 or 1999, and I find it very hard to believe that the film was then simply just left on a shelf, finished but untouched, so I'm going to assume at least a few copies were struck and given to people involved in the film's production. At a push, and as mentioned, I could envision maybe a few single-digit copies making their way into bootleg circles, because surely it would have had to have done the rounds to have even been seen by the folks working in boutique label companies for them to have picked up the phone. Or rather, films that only exist as one copy in one person's bedroom that haven't been seen in the 20 years since they were finished seldom get a wide release on DVD and VHS. So I assume copies must have gotten out there at some point in the 2000s. In either case, its first official distribution came in 2021, courtesy of SRS Cinema. They released the version with the altered soundtrack and, if memory serves, some slight tweaks to the edit to help the new soundtrack flow a little better. So not so much a redux, but rather a tightening. And it looks a little worse for wear, but for the most part it holds up about as well as most of these SOV flicks. Extras are a bit thin on the ground. We have a commentary track and a trailer for one of David's other movies, The House on Cuckoo Lane, which actually does look really cool, and is one I've added to my to-watch list and I hope to check out really soon. But yeah, It's good that this film has finally seen the light of day officially. If I was nitpicking, it would have been nice though to have maybe had a making of or something on this, just to help add context as to why the film is the way it is, and how this thing ended up not surfacing for as long as it did. Garden Tool Massacre was, for me, a frustrating watch. While it has some fantastic visual work on display for SOV and a really tight edit, lighting and score to boot in places, the script is so derivative and repetitive and the cast is so disconnected from the tone of the film that it makes it hard to really truly get into this one. A few unintentionally funny line deliveries just about tip this film into the good books for me, but it's such a narrow margin that I honestly don't think I can recommend this one. I feel almost certain that this is a film I'm going to have to watch again at some point to see if there's something I've missed that adds a whole other layer to this thing, but from what I've seen, its good points are somewhat neutralised by its bad points, and its bad points are toned down by the good. Approach with caution if you want to catch this one, lower your expectations, and I think you may be pleasantly surprised.